What if the next year could transform not only how you lead, but who you become as a leader? At Taliash University, leadership begins with purpose. Our one-year Leadership Excellence program, built on the mission and expertise of Taliash Collaborative Network, equips leaders with the skills, the confidence, and the vision to create lasting impact in their organizations, their communities, and their lives. This isn't just another leadership course. Our 100% virtual program combines expert faculty, mentoring, monthly learning sessions, and a collaborative community that many graduates call life and career transforming. It's an opportunity to discover your purpose, strengthen your leadership, improve organizational performance, and learn alongside a community of leaders committed to making a difference. You've been looking for the next step in your leadership journey? We invite you to learn more. Join one of our upcoming interest webinars where you'll meet our team, explore the program, and you'll discover whether the Leadership Excellence program is right for you. Register today by clicking the link provided below. Taliash University, step into your potential and lead with purpose.
Good employers know that health benefits can make or break your business. But while employers are looking out for their employees' best interest, who is looking out for theirs? Sona Benefits is an independent pharmacy benefit manager who partners with employers to optimize their pharmacy benefits while supporting their business goals. But by offering no-spread pricing, contract guaranteed rebates, and the Sona Max program, clients are regularly able to save 20% to 35% off their total drug spend. The result? Pharmacy benefits that improve employees' well-being and employers' bottom line.
Welcome to TCN Talks, an Anatomy of Leadership. We continue our conversation with Annette Kiser and Judi Lund Person in Part 2, Hospice Wage Index, the final rule, and the signals CMS is sending for 2027. And now, here's Chris Comeaux.
So as we go to this next segment, every final rule creates opportunities for some organizations and challenges. Which type of hospices do you think are positioned to succeed under this year's rule? And which organizations should be paying maybe really particular close attention to it?
Well, I think that as Judi and I discussed when we were preparing for this, every provider is going to face challenges with this increased oversight. This data is public. CMS has it. It's out there for anyone that wants to go looking for it. And it means that we have to think about, okay, CMS is looking, but who else is looking? You know, we've got the other contractors. And of course, we know that MedPAC and the GAO and others are paying attention. But we have to think about how can we respond. And those that are going to succeed are those that look at this as the glass half full moment as opposed to the glass half empty. We've been called up for a couple years in a lot of situations where we talk about what's being done to us and why. And we did try to get CMS to make some changes. Not that we don't think transparency and data reporting is important, but we think their metrics are skewed. And we don't have the information, as Judi was explaining, to be able to see where this non-hospice spending is coming from. We can't continue, as CMS said, Judi said, basically in her editorial comment, stop whining. We have to now stop and look at what we can do. Those organizations that started talking about mandatory addendum and what would we do if it came, they're ready to roll. Others, as I said, haven't even started the conversation. But it's taking that and looking at it, as Judi talked about with the data. What does it say? What are your trends over the last 2 to 3 years when it comes to those district metrics? PEPPER talks about outside Part B spending and Part D spending and gives us a little bit more granular data for our hospice. So they have to take that, they have to look at it. It's got to be across the organization. We can't just say, okay, this is up to compliance and quality to track this. Yes, you can assign someone to monitor it and make sure it's being done, but it's got to come into play with when you're looking at non-hospice spending. You've got to involve your accounts payable team and working with those outside providers to get those invoices in so that hospice can pay and it's not being billed elsewhere. So those that are spending time thinking systemically as opposed to siloed thinking are going to do much better. The organizations that really haven't spent time on this and haven't even tuned in years ago when we started the addendum are going to struggle. I saw in some commentary in an online group this week where people were talking about the addendum, and a nurse said, well, isn't that the ABN, the Advanced Beneficiary Notice of Non-Coverage? No, very, very different. And then they were like, well, okay, we have a lot of things we don't pay for, so we're really going to have to think about this. And so those organizations that really haven't tuned in and don't have a clue what this is now that it's mandatory are going to be behind the eight ball, so to speak, and they're going to have a tougher time. But we really have to stop and think, okay, we have it, as you've talked about already, Chris and Judi, with the tea leaves. The tea leaves are telling us this. Let's just stop and think, how can we strategically, systemically use this information and prepare and position ourselves so that when we get looked at, we're okay. We know that we're going to be in good shape. We may not be there today, but we're putting things in place with our quality improvement processes to be able to get there.
Yeah, no, I just want to add to that a little bit that Annette is exactly right. And maybe we could spend just a little bit of time on the component parts of the addendum now that it is going to be mandatory. And it is the addendum, as Annette reminded me yesterday, the addendum is mandatory for things that are unrelated to the terminal illness and related conditions, period. There's a lot of language in the final rule about documentation. So all the times that over the years we have talked about documentation, it is so, so important now. Reminder that decisions about unrelatedness, and Annette, I know you will want to add to this too, should be done by the physician. And so documentation should show that the physician is the one that made that decision. And I was talking to a provider the other day, and she said, well, we had made the decision when the addendum first came out that we would do it for everybody. But she said, we have, and this is, thank you, Annette, for helping me. We have a section on the addendum that says it's related but not covered, or related but not indicated. So let's go there. Let's go there for a moment. And we start to look at what we're hearing from CMS about the addendum as a condition of payment. That means that if on medical review, the medical reviewer doesn't see the addendum after October 1, that when a claim is sent in for review, the whole stay will not be paid for. It is a condition of payment, period. Now, if it is a condition of payment, the last thing you want is to have things on the addendum, the official addendum form, that say these things are related, but we're not going to pay for them. No. So be really, really careful that the addendum is open to scrutiny, open to very serious consequences if something isn't provided. So that doesn't mean we don't cover what's related but not covered or not indicated. That those documents will be in that documentation will be in the clinical record, but not on the addendum. So just to be really, really clear on that part of it.
Years now, we've been talking about moving from volume to value. As you guys read this rule, how do you see CMS continuing to shift the hospice world towards accountability for quality outcomes in our data?
Well, so there are a couple of really interesting things, I think, here. And one of them is that the patient population we serve. So for other parts of healthcare, they're looking at the CAP survey, and it gets the information coming directly from the patient. We're looking at metrics that are outcome-based because the patient was started here, improved to here, and we have metrics for that. In hospice, it's completely different. And so even our CAP survey is family or representative responses about their view of how the hospice care that their loved one received was how it was. But it's not coming directly from the patient. But this is another place where I think reading the tea leaves from CMS is really important. So we start with data collection, quality reporting. We both have the CAP survey, and then we also have the HIS and now HOPE. So it's the beginning of collect the data and collect all that information on all of your patients. And then what will happen? I was just telling Annette that I think what we saw on the home health side is we had data collection start, we had Oasis, then we had Oasis Plus now, and I did some research on what was the timeline, and for home health it was about 18 years. Now, when did we start HIS, and when did we start some of that early data collection, standardized data collection work? About 10 years ago. So I think we are moving in the direction. If you read some of the stuff that's put out on the hospice quality reporting website, then you also know that they're looking for additional measures. They're looking not just for process measures, but for outcome measures. Once we get to outcome measures, then we will have scoring that will say your outcome was better than hospice B, and so you get paid more. But I don't. I think it'll be a while before that is really settled. But I also think that the focus at the moment is on hospice fraud, waste, and abuse, and that may push up or speed up the value-based purchasing, or it could say we can't do both, so we'll just do fraud, waste, and abuse. So I think both things are possible, but at this point, that's kind of I think where we are.
Those are excellent points, Judi. And probably right. If it took 18 years, but I think about like data and technology, the runway is not going to be 18 years for us. The cycle is going to go quicker, which would mean we're probably in that window. So that's an excellent point. Well, let me ask you guys this. Margins remain under pressure, workforce shortages, inflation's huge, increasing patient complexity, especially as the baby boomers are becoming more and more patients. They have so many comorbidities. So if you look at this year's rule, do you believe CMS understands, adequately recognizes those realities, or are there areas where providers are just going to continue to struggle financially?
I'll start, but Annette, I know you will want to add as well. But I think I'll start with the rate increase. The percentage of the rate increase is a statutory percentage. It's not a statutory percentage, but it is linked to the hospital rates and that sort of thing. So, I think in some ways it's good to have at least a requirement that the statute says you have to increase the hospice rate. Um, and I honestly don't think that CMS really understands the financial realities at all. And we are certainly in a place where MedPAC, for instance, is looking at margins, and they publish information in the hospice chapter every March. And I think that's another piece of this where we're looking at margins. We're looking at how can a hospice do more, and then do more with really not a lot of increase in rates. And I think that's part of the real frustration. I don't think CMS understands kind of what the pressures are. Then we also have all the pressures of you should be paying for more, and so the combo is not a very good one.
Just in your long sigh, it says a whole bunch, Judi. It just really does, because you're exactly right. It feels like they're expecting us to just do more and more with less. Right. And most businesses, like inflation is people raising their actual prices because but we can't actually. And what were you going to add?
Right.
Well, I was going to add, we've talked a lot about data around the utilization and non-hospice spending, but another very important piece of data that I don't think gets enough attention in hospice is what we report to CMS in our cost reports.
Oh, absolutely.
If CMS is going to look at future payment reform, our cost reports have to accurately reflect what we're doing. They've got to be clean. They've got to be auditable. And I don't think they are, based on the information that CMS has used through the years to talk about what it costs to take care of a hospice patient. Not enough information is being reported, and you've got wide variations with a couple dollars to hundreds or thousands of dollars for the same service being provided. So we really got to look at what's going in our cost reports in addition to what's going on our claims. Yes, SSVI comes from claims data, but that cost report is what's going to really inform what's going to happen with payment reform.
Right.
It's so well said, Annette.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely.
Yeah, because the interesting, right? SSVI is a bit of a tale in another way. I had Kim Brandon on my podcast, and one of the things we talked about is a chili cook-off. She wasn't cooking chili. She was bringing these technology vendors in of what they could do for CMS. And so CMS is boning up. They have a boatload of data, and then they start digging into that data. And Annette, I don't think they've dug into the cost report data much. I may be wrong about that, but it feels like that might be a future frontier for them.
Well, I think you're right, Chris, because from a fraud perspective, cost report probably doesn't tell them a lot. It's that claims data that really helps them with the fraud aspect. But again, from payment reform, if they're going to start looking at paying more for certain diagnosis categories or paying more for certain patients who need certain services, we know they've mentioned things around dialysis and blood transfusions and some of those kinds of things as potential changes in payment. And those kinds of things get reported in cost reports.
I was just going to add one small thing, and that is cost reports could be used, and I've seen some analysis already being done on this that said, what does it cost per day of routine home care? What's your cost? What do you report on the cost report, and what do you get paid? And the differential is what now people are starting to get a lot more interested in, because if you say a cost for a day of care or hospice cost reports aggregated say this, that it's pretending, don't hold me to the number, but say it's $180 a day and you're getting $211 a day or whatever that number might be. I think that's another place where we have to pay a great deal of attention, and it's probably worth it to also say AI and pulling cost report information out. And lots of people, I bet, are going to be looking at some of that.
Well said. Well, as we kind of go into our final few questions, I want to ask you a couple futuristic questions. And this year's final rule, it's really a chapter in a much larger story. Where do you think the Medicare hospice benefit is headed over the next, let's say 3 to 5 years? What should visionary hospice leaders begin preparing for today based upon whatever those tales are in that kind of larger story of where things are headed?
Well, Chris, I think a lot really just reiterating what we've talked about, a lot of increased reliance on data-driven oversight. Know your numbers, know your trends. We have the SSVI, we have PEPPER. That takes us through the fiscal year 2025. Well, in 6 weeks, we're going to end fiscal year 2026. What does your data show you now that you're not going to see from CMS for potentially another year? You need to know what it shows now. So that increased reliance on data-driven oversight and really getting good at that. We know the EMRs are not necessarily good at some of those reports, but now that we have outside vendors and we have artificial intelligence, when used well and used correctly, can help do some of that analysis and really start to see more attention to our utilization patterns and non-hospice spending that Judi spent a good bit of time talking about. And really thinking about outcomes, as CMS said, as Judi said, CMS is talking more about outcomes. We've wanted outcomes for years. We looked at outcomes as potentially quality measures and clinical measures. CMS is really looking at some of these other measures around service utilization and dollars. And so I think it's that increased pressure to demonstrate quality and value, as Judi was talking about with some of those margins.
I was having a conversation with somebody at CMS yesterday, and they are reviewing a lot. This is intensely into fraud, waste, and abuse in hospice. And her comment over and over to me is, please tell hospices to get back to the basics, to remember what hospice care is, that it is not just a service, it's a program, and it has component parts. And I've been thinking about that a lot and thinking, some of the utilization metrics are back to the basics, and what we pay for and what we should pay for. Maybe those two things are different, but also that is part of the design. And I know, all of us would want to say, well, we can revise the hospice benefit in all these ways. What if we did da 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 da? What if we did blah blah blah? But if we also remember that changes to the Medicare hospice benefit are statutory, and one of the conversations, for instance, yesterday was, okay, can we add a requirement that a hospice has to have an office? And it's one of my passion points. So the comment from the folks at CMS was, where can we hook it to the statute? So I think we want to be I think we can begin to be thoughtful in different ways to say, what do we have that if we hook something to, her words, not mine, hook something to the statute that changes the regulation without having to change the statute? That's a place I think we have some fertile ground. So, I think creativity, stick-to-itiveness, purpose, mission. But for me, at the end of the day, the 100% focus is, what does that patient and family need? And that's, I can't go beyond that. It's just so important.
Well, and to that point, Judi, it is about what patients and families need. And I hear hospices get caught up in, all the regulations and the documentation and the audits takes away from patients and families, and it does to a point. But that utilization data tells us where we may be missing the mark.
Right.
Patients aren't getting visits on the weekends. Patients are being discharged and then coming back in 7 days.
Right.
With non-hospice spending, we have to keep in mind that there's a beneficiary cost to that. And so if we keep patients and families at the center of what we're doing, and when we think about looking at these pieces, that's really what it's about. What do our SSVI scores, our PEPPER data, and these other metrics show us about the care we're providing to our patients?
Well said. Well, let me ask this one, because this is a kind of an interesting twist. So leaders spend a lot of energy reacting to regulations, and that you just live in that world. And we always talk about how it's so interesting that wouldn't you wish they reacted to every initiative like they do to regulations in some cases, or at least the programs we work with? Sometimes you almost overcorrect. But exceptional leaders, they anticipate where healthcare is going before the regulations require it. So most of the regulations are lagging type situation. They're trying to get people to play by the rules, et cetera. So as you guys study this rule, what should hospice leaders maybe start building today? Not because CMS is requiring it, but because this is where serious illness should be heading. And, we've got the baby boomers of which both of you are at least in that area. And so there's something that should be built that's going to care for many of us and our family right now. What should that be?
Well, for me, as I think about many hospice leaders I know, I think the ones that are going to be successful into the future are looking for innovation. They're looking for things that will make their life easier. They're looking at appropriate and careful use of AI. They're looking at all of the kinds of things that are swirling around, but they're not. And I think this would be the place that I think we wouldn't see good leaders that are looking at bright, shiny objects. Oh, yes, this is the nice next new best thing, but are much more measured and careful about bringing your whole staff together, showing the leadership that's needed, and not doing it all themselves, but spreading out the work so that with an idea that we have, at the end of the day, a new reality that we all know where it is and what can happen with it.
Well, and I think that's right, Judi. Bringing everybody together, we often see things kind of siloed in organizations, and having leaders across clinical, compliance, quality, finance, administration, from the CEO down to the folks in the background working in accounts payable that see some of these issues with non-hospice spending. It's really thinking about the fact that, as you said, Chris, we've got the baby boomers. We have shortages of staff. That's not going to change. And how can we take the information and use it to improve our outcomes, improve care for our patients and families? And I will say, and Judi, you have more conversations with CMS than I do, but I will say that CMS is listening. They're paying attention. Yes, they're doing some bring the hammer down, like with the moratorium on new enrollments. But at the same time, they are hearing and they're looking. And it's not just one department of CMS. It's Center for Program Integrity, and it's the payment folks. It's all the way up to Kim Brandt and Dr. Oz. And so they're paying attention to those things. But we have to give solid information. As Judi said, we got to stop whining. We have to figure out what can we say to CMS with metrics, with solid information. There has to be data to support it that will help CMS understand what it is that we need. We know what we need, and we spend a lot of time talking about it, but we have to stop reacting, prepare for the future before more changes become mandatory, and be ready for those. And so I really think it's that, again, thinking critically, systemically, and looking big picture. Chris, you're great at talking about being visionary, and that's what they've got to do and really think about those things.
Okay. Well, ladies, I'd love to hear both of you. What final thoughts do you have? Always love to hear your wisdom. Final thoughts.
Oh, this is, I think, I thought you were going to ask about what kind of a quote we might have. So, but this is final thought and Diane Meyer discussion around palliative care, even in the early days. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so I think if we are thinking about how we can position hospice leaders for the future, we want to be at the table. Now, for me, the other thing is we have to build relationships, and relationships all over the place. So that is in our communities, within our states, whatever relationships we have at the federal level. So that's kind of my thought. Being at the table is the most important thing.
Well, I agree. Being at the table is important. And we have organizations out there. Judi and I both spend a lot of time working with NPHI, and they're doing a good job of getting us in front of CMS and different departments so that we can work on some things. And so I do think, being at the table, but just be attuned, reach out to use your resources so that you're not in it alone. Others are going through these things as well. And so just really stop and think about where do you want to be in that 3 to 5 years, and what do we want our patients and families ultimately to get from our hospices.
Well said. Well, ladies, I'm so glad you were still at this. You both have so many years of knowledge and perspective. And so just getting your perspective every time a new wage index comes out, it is, the regulation just feels like it's getting tougher and tougher. And usually I'm a bit of a student of business cycles. When you're in that business cycle, those are the times, the eras, or their seasons when you need the most innovation, because the regulation just keeps kind of making it harder and harder and harder. And sometimes the innovation is, how do you innovate what is better? Innovations within hospice, but then how do you innovate maybe further upstream? People use the term disruptive innovation, substitution, competitions. It feels like we've got to be doing both during this season, because hospice is just going to get tougher and tougher just by itself.
No, absolutely.
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, to our listeners, we thank you. At the end of each episode, we always share a quote, a visual. The idea is to create a brain bookmark, a thought prodder about our podcast subject to further your learning, your thought, and your growth. And we're hoping that sticks like a brain tattoo. Be sure to subscribe to TCN Talks, The Anatomy of Leadership. We don't want you to miss an episode. If you're interested in the book, Anatomy of Leadership, we always have a link to that. It's easy for us to rail against the world and be frustrated by things. Let's be the change that we wish to see in the world. So thanks for listening to TCN Talks, The Anatomy of Leadership. And here's our brain bookmark to close today's show.
The leader who is forever in the learning mode is the most likely to succeed. By Dr. Lee Thayer.